This is always an interesting area to explore, so we will discuss disruptive, impulse control, and conduct disorders. So these are just as they sound. They're really centered around this idea of a lack of impulse or self-control. We might see indicators of this when individuals are younger, and these then have equivalent diagnoses more in the personality disorder realm, potentially when individuals get older. So these are really focused on issues that might show up in childhood. So we'll talk about things like ODD and conduct disorder, and then also intermittent explosive pyromania and kleptomania. So with oppositional defiant disorder, we often see this come up with children, and it's been a very popular diagnosis in the last couple of years, particularly with kids. And with girls, it's important to note that often ADHD is misdiagnosed as oppositional defiant disorder. So when, in particularly with girls, we're seeing a lot of issues with attentiveness, issues with impulse control, those can be indicators of ADHD. So we have to be very careful in making sure that we're doing good, thorough diagnostics, and we might need some additional psychological testing to really rule out some of those options before we assign an ODD diagnosis. So with ODD, we're seeing a pattern of angry or irritable mood. Again, this can be also an indicator of depression or ADHD or anxiety with kids. Argumentative or defiant behavior, or vindictiveness for at least 6 months. So again, just really wanting to emphasize, we want to rule out other options too. So this is indicated during interactions with others, not just fighting with siblings, but with others, a lot of times with authority figures or with parents through 4 or more of these diagnostic criteria. So there's some options in each of these areas. You'll see there's criteria within the angry and irritable area, the argumentative and defiant area, and the vindictiveness area. They just need 4 or more throughout any of these categories. So with the angry and irritable, they are often losing their temper, feeling touchy or easily annoyed, often angry or resentful. And noting with adolescent boys in particular, that is also how depression often presents. So it can be a lot more aggression and a lot more anger. Similarly with anxiety, can present that way. And it could be something about oppositional defiant disorder, which is really about challenging authority. So with the argumentative and defiant area, this is where we see more of that. So there's argument with authority figures, thinking teachers, thinking adults, thinking parents, other individuals, actively defying and refusing to comply with requests from those figures or refusing to comply with the rules. And this is not an isolated example. This is across the board. So this is not like there's one rule that they really disagree with. This is across the board. They are just refusing to comply with any kind of rules. They deliberately annoy others or provoke them and blame others for their mistakes or misbehavior. So when we talk about personality disorders, we'll see how there are some precursors here to some personality disorders that we can diagnose later in life. The vindictiveness piece is really about being spiteful or vindictive at least twice within the last 6 months. Now think about teenagers and how many times a teenager has been vindictive at least twice in the last 6 months, right? So that's why it's important to note that we need more than just one criteria to meet this diagnosis, to assign this diagnosis, because some of these things might happen in isolation, but they need to be happening pretty consistently for at least 6 months. So always taking into account with kids and teenagers what's within normal developmental limits for someone about at their developmental age. And we see the same things related to causing distress or inability to progress across areas. And then we always want to rule out like psychotic or mood-related disorders, as I'd been mentioning. The psychotic disorders, really these things can be reactions to potentially having hallucinations. And so it's important to rule those things out. The next is intermittent explosive disorder. This really, again, has to do with impulse control and self-control. This is very involuntary. So individuals who lash out because of intermittent explosive disorder really cannot help it. It's just sort of like shaking up a soda bottle to the point where it explodes. It has to go somewhere. So this is about recurrent behavioral outbursts and a failure to control aggression. And this can be verbal aggression or physical aggression towards property, animals, or others, at least twice a week for at least 3 months. Physical aggression does not result in damage or destruction, not physical injury to animals or others. So this is not about wanting to hurt others. That's more in the conduct disorder area. This is just about outbursts. So the intention is not to hurt the other person. It's just an impulse. So these behavioral outbursts involving damage or destruction to property, these are a different category, but again, it's less about intention to hurt others and more about inability to control the impulse to lash out. So the magnitude of the aggression is grossly out of proportion to the provocation or the stress. And there was a student I used to work with who was in a college environment, and they had this diagnosis. And one of their peer tutors was helping them with a homework assignment. And they had just pointed out that they'd made a mistake on the homework assignment. And because of this diagnosis, their response to that was to break the person's glasses off of their face. And they were immediately remorseful. They were crying and upset because they couldn't control the impulse to lash out because of the feeling of failure that they had from messing up their homework. So they were immediately regretful. They had empathy for that person. They were so upset. They didn't mean to do it. And really, that's the key here. So it's not premeditated. It's not meant to get something. You're not stealing stuff. It's not bullying. It's just an impulse control issue. And so these obviously are causing marked distress. It has to be someone more than 6 years old, which makes sense if you think about it, because if you think about toddlers, every single one of them has intermittent explosive disorder because they don't always have the language to be able to comprehend and express their emotions. They just sort of come out. And we want to rule out things like adjustment disorders, mood disorders, psychotic disorders. So making sure these things are not happening because of some sort of hallucination, as a grief response potentially, or as a response to anxiety. So the next is conduct disorder. This one is very interesting. We sort of nicknamed this one the baby psychopath disorder. So conduct disorder is the opposite of intermittent explosive disorder. It's repetitive and persistent patterns of behavior where the objective is to violate the basic rights of others, to violate the rules intentionally, to cause problems. So with ODD, it's about I can't follow the rules. Conduct disorder is very vindictive. I'm going to break the rules because I want to make you mad and show you that you can't control me. This is the precursor to antisocial personality disorder for individuals over the age of 18. So we're looking at least 3 of these criteria in the last 12 months, and they have to be pretty recent, so at least one of them has to be within the last 6 months. So we're looking for aggression to people or animals. And the one related to animals is really a telltale sign of conduct disorder. So with this disorder, we often see it start with intentional harm to animals and then potentially progress and escalate into harming people. So this is bullying, threatening, or intimidating others, getting into fights intentionally or initiating those fights, using weapons against others, being physically cruel to people or animals, has stolen while confronting the victim. So think about mugging or bullying to the point and stealing your stuff in the process of beating someone else up. Or this can be forced sexual activity and assault. So very intentional harm to others. And again, this often starts with animals. Destruction of property. So you've deliberately engaged in things like setting fires or deliberately destroying property to others. Deceitfulness or theft, so breaking into houses, breaking into buildings, breaking into and stealing cars. Lying to get things or to steal things, so like doing cons against others or taking advantage or tricking others. And stealing stuff without a value, so stealing stuff for the sake of stealing it. So this isn't like, my family needs money to eat, so I'm going to steal things. This is like, I'm going to steal stuff because I can. And what are you going to do about it? And then serious violations of the rules. So breaking curfew, running away from home, being truant from school. And again, all of these are more about the violation of the rules. So they're not really running away from anything in particular, like a bad home situation. They're just running away to manipulate others and to show that they're in control. So with pyromania, we're looking at deliberate and purposeful fire setting. And it has to do almost with like a release or a pleasure from setting fires, right? So there's this tension or arousal before you do it, fascination with fire and situational contexts, getting gratification and pleasure from setting fire or seeing the aftermath of the fire. And it's not the same as conduct disorder. It's really not done for monetary gain or protest or criminal activities or anything of that nature. It's really just about loving the fire piece. So you want to rule out the cause of why they're setting fires. Same with kleptomania. So same kind of concept, but with stealing. So there's that arousal piece, there's that tension, there's that release and gratification with stealing things, but you're not stealing them for the sake of monetary value or of use. You're just stealing them for the high of stealing in the first place.